Millionaire CEO feigns sleep to test shy Maid and freezes seeing what she does. The rain didn't just tap the windows tonight. It wrote warnings across the glass. Amara Hayes eased the study door open, expecting dust and silence. Not a battlefield. The desk lamp burned low, carving an island around Victor Langley's motionless arm. A crystal tumbler lay on its side, a crescent drying on leather, 2 prescription vials open, the laptop awake. One line glowed. If this is the only way to make the noise stop, her lungs forgot how to move. She skimmed the room the way a lifeguard skims black water, chair, fireplace. The safe cracked an inch, the framed photograph of a laughing woman and a boy with storm blue eyes. Then the impossible detail, Victor's phone face up beneath the chair, recording. The red dot pulsed. Someone had named the file Audit. Mr. Langley? Her whisper vanished into woolen books. No reply. She found a pulse, but there, tugging against her fingers as if trying to answer. Every rule Miss Carver drilled into new staff marched through her head. Don't touch valuables, don't read screens, be invisible. Every bill in her bag answered back with a louder rule. Keep him alive. The laptop pinged. A message slid across the screen from an unknown number. Is he down yet? The camera looks perfect. Move quickly. Cold lifted the hair along her arms. Amara slid the bottles away, loosened his tie and opened the window for rain-cool air. Somewhere in the corridor a floorboard complained. Footsteps waited, then withdrew. She took a breath that tasted like tin. Another message. Delete the note when you're done. We meet at the gate in 5. Her thumb hovered over 9101, then stilled. If someone was watching, dialing could set the trap. She leaned close to Victor and chose a different risk. What happened next will shock you. 3 weeks before the night that would change her life, Amara Hayes paused at a wrought iron gate while copper leaves skittered along a private drive. The mansion beyond the trees caught a band of autumn and returned it without warmth. She checked the cracked corner of her phone, drew her thrifted coat closer, and pressed the call button. A speaker clicked. Name? Amara Hayes. Interview with Mrs. Carver. The gate slid aside with a sigh. Gravel whispered as she followed the curve to a portico. Before she lifted the brass knocker, the door opened into chandelier light and waiting silence. A woman in a navy suit stood in the doorway, hair silver and pinned, expression composed to the edge of stern. Mrs. Elaine Carver, she said, offering a firm hand. Head housekeeper. The foyer smelled of citrus and polished veined marble reflected them in fragments. Understand that Mr. Langley's privacy is absolute, she continued, guiding Amara down a measured hall. Staff are discreet, efficient, invisible. Conversation with him occurs only when invited. Phones remain in lockers. Doors to the study and suite are knocked upon once and then left. If unanswered, no photographs, no posts, no speculation. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am, Amara said. We work 6 days on, 1 day off, rotating. Mrs. Carver continued. Compensation is $1,500 per week. Health insurance begins on day 30. Shifts begin at 7 and end when tasks are complete. You will maintain the library's second-floor guest rooms, the east corridor, silver, seasonal arrangements, and light maintenance. There is a checklist. There are standards. Uniforms are provided. Relief rose in Amara's chest. 1,500 meant refills without pleading at the counter. A cab for clinic mornings when stares bullied her mother's lungs. Groceries without bruises. A rent envelope sealed on time. References? Miss Carver asked. Amara handed an envelope. From a hotel manager and from the church office I clean at night. Mrs. Carver scanned quickly. Reliable, punctual, calm when guests are not. She lifted her gaze. Why this position? My mother is ill. I need steady pay. I also like rules. Rules are the air here, Mrs. Carver said. Follow. She led Amara into a library rising 2 stories. Walnut dark, ladders polished by hands no longer. A coffered ceiling pressed sound, teaching voices to behave. The fireplace held stacked birch that would not burn. No photographs dotted the mantel. Mr. Langley lost his wife and son last year. Mrs. Carver said, he works late. He prefers silence to sympathy. Do not attempt comfort. Do not interpret quiet as an invitation. Announce yourself. Complete your tasks. Leave without remark. Yes, Amara said, studying the grain of the table. They moved on. A dining room laid for a dinner that never happened. A music room with a grand piano closed like a secret. A crescent of dust along the lid. A sunroom looking over hedges clipped into geometry. Outside, gardeners raked leaves into piles. Inside, vents exhaled and hushed, pressed at the ear. Staff break room, Mrs. Carver said, opening a door. A kettle, a microwave, lockers for staff, and a bulletin board crowded with posted schedules and notes. Meals after 2. Schedules are posted weekly. Will I meet Mr. Langley? Amara asked. If required, came the reply. They returned to the foyer. From the landing above came the softest suggestion of movement. Fabric against wood, and then nothing, as if the house chose to hold its breath. You start Monday, Mrs. Carver said. Orientation tomorrow. Uniform fitting today. Bring no valuables. Speak to no reporters at all. There have been attempts. Understood, Amara said. On the bus home, Amara texted her mother. Got the job and watched a string of hearts arrive. Then the reminder to eat. At their kitchen table, she annotated the medication calendar, folded laundry and let relief keep a chair for the evening. Monday dawned pewter. She reached the side entrance early with her hair braided, her shoes polished, and her notebook in her pocket. She learned the alarm code and the order of lamps that should glow at dusk and hide at noon, the vinegar-to-water ratio that cleared crystal without streaks, the polish that preferred circles, and how to sign the log with initials and time. She learned the building the way a nurse learns a patient, which door swelled after rain, which stair complained, which vent hummed when set too high. Deliveries reached a side entrance without signatures. The cook liked grocery lists in block letters and frowned at scented soaps. The valet drove a hybrid, raising a moral question. The gardener worked barehanded and nodded hello without slowing his rake. In the east corridor, she straightened a frame. In the guest suite, she tightened a finial so it would not rattle at midnight. Every task concluded with a check mark on the list. Each day, Victor Langley moved like the weather. On her third day, she saw him crossing a landing with a jacket folded over one arm, gaze fixed past the next room. He was tall, carrying space the way a tide carries boat. Grief had given him gravity. Everything near seemed drawn inward. He did not look down, he did not need to. This architecture existed to remove friction. Amara let her eyes pass on. Presence without oxygen was a skill practiced in adolescence. She folded towels until edges kissed, pressed pillowcases with a sweep, placed matches at hearths and counted them into a log, then moved. At noon, she ate in the break room while a radio murmured weather and market. Afterward, she returned to corridors that smelled of beeswax and the metallic scent that means winter approaches. Evening buses carried her past murals and storefront churches to a bodega that smelled of oranges. At home, she helped her mother rise, filled the spacer, waded through the climb of breath to comfort, brewed tea, and sat close. She sealed cash into envelopes labeled rent, clinic, transit, and grocery. Pride weighed as much as relief, and the quiet between them felt less like absence than a truce with day. By the second week, she noticed traces of a life the mansion refused to advertise. Inside a closet jam, pencil marks recorded a child's growth. Behind a radiator grate, a toy car waited with its roof tilted, watching the room. On a music book's cover, a coffee ring lingered. She did not disturb these artifacts. Reverence can be a kind of work. Victor's schedule kept him nearly everywhere. He left early, returned late, and disappeared into the study, whose door leaked light after rooms dimmed. Trays returned untouched, cups cooled without lips on the rim. Newspapers went back to curb-bound. Amara obeyed rules that did not require repetition. She knocked once and left at the study, answered with silence, set linens on a console, polished silver until it remembered brightness, and returned each piece to exact positions. She checked alarms, wiped banisters, and recorded hours with a pen that made lines. No curiosity, no commentary, competence. Day after day, yet hope threaded the routine. The pay landed, the pharmacist learned her name, and asked after her mother. Nights softened with quiz shows and tea. By month's end, as dusk pooled, she paused at a library threshold and felt pressure falling before a storm. By next week, Amara will move through the East Corridor with a rhythm learned by caretakers who listen more than they speak. She pressed latches that stuck after rain, leveled frames that leaned, and carried a caddy with brushes, lint-free cloths, and lemon oil. Breakfast trays still waited at the service door, linen uncreased, coffee cooling untouched. The cook muttered that oatmeal congealed into mortar and swore at waste. From the study came the rise and fall of late calls, the kind that end without goodbye. Amara clocked in, tied her apron, and let the house teach its quiet lessons. She stayed inside the rules yet searched for ways to soften what the rules could never reach. On Tuesdays, she opened curtains in rooms marked for daylight, letting a pale gold slip across rugs and raise dust into soft constellations. Heavy drapes remained tied with cords at measured angles. She copied the knots until tassels fell in even twins. In the music room, she lifted the piano lid a fraction and brushed the keyboard with a lambswool wand, leaving the instrument ready without presuming to summon a note. Air moved differently afterward, as if the room remembered lungs and consented to breathe. When the gardener trimmed rose canes, he left a bucket of salvageable stems by the compost heap. Amara chose the least wounded, worked at the scullery sink, cleared thorns and coaxed a shy curl from petals with cool water. She found narrow vases in a high cupboard, polished their throats, and placed them in the library, the entry console, and the upstairs hall. Not bouquets that shouted, only pauses suggesting the day could look up. She slid rosemary beside them, a scent that steadied nerves and made the marble feel less like a verdict and more like ground. Next came warmth that lived in light rather than expense. Several lamps burned too blue for a building already holding winter at the window. She swapped bulbs for softer ones from storage, recording every change on a maintenance form with initials neat as stitches. She folded throws across chair arms in the study antechamber, stacked birch by the hearth, and taught the flue to open on the first pull so even a distracted hand could coax flame. She set a small basket for correspondence, where drafts could not be bullied by paper, placed matches in a line, and moved quietly on. Victor noticed without admitting he was noticing. He paused by the entry console one evening, thumb grazing a pedal edge, as though cataloging texture. On Thursday, he stepped into the music room and almost closed the lid again, then left it propped as she had placed it. Meal trays returned less tragically. Half the soup was gone, crumbs on a plate, and a spoon was no longer spotless. The house, still quiet, altered in ways only someone who loved order would acknowledge, adjustments so modest they asked permission even as they gently held the day together. Amara never lingered within his sightline. She learned to read the state of a room like a nurse reads a chart, then withdrew, leaving space to breathe. Still, proximity happened. While polishing the banister, she heard him descend, phone at his ear, silence pacing the other end. He nodded once as he passed, gaze distant, jaws. She stepped aside with a murmured greeting that respected both rule and grief, then wiped the place his hand had warmed and let the wood keep that small confession. The first note appeared on Friday beside the smallest vase on the library table. Thank you for the flowers, they made the morning tolerable. The handwriting was steady, decisive, and economical with ink. Amara memorized the neat slant, then slid a reply onto the corner of the housekeeping log. The garden still keeps color near the potting bench, tucked out of the wind. Light gathers there. She returned the log to its hook, heart careful, because gratitude can break when handled roughly. Silence stretched through the weekend, then returned carrying a second message. The far corner, you say. I had forgotten it. The rosemary reached my coat. She smiled at the idea of a coat, remembering and folding laundry with a care that made the fabric approve. The exchange lived where rules allowed it, brief, practical, unsentimental on the surface, yet meaning threaded every restraint, a current running beneath marble where footsteps hardly dared speak. Even the foyer mirror seemed less severe, as though candor had been cleaned into the glass. She added a single tulip in a bud vase to the upstairs landing, red as a sealed envelope. She angled a tieback to yield more morning light to the wall where growth marks kept years. She replaced harsh kitchen bulbs, earning a grunt from the cook, and a penciled thank you on the inventory sheet. In the study antechamber, she set a cleaned wool blanket inside a cedar chest, with a card that read, for weary shoulders on cold nights. Kindness travels better when it whispers. The card remained. The blanket did not, disappearing by dusk, and returning creased by sleep. He answered with an adjustment of his own. The library windows, sticky since September, had defeated even the valet. One afternoon she found it sliding true and balanced. Runners newly waxed, a small jar of graphite on the sill, and a note card, considerate a trade. I took a walk. The air was inhospitable and necessary. She pictured his road through clipped hedges to the rosemary corner, the slow consent of lungs that had avoided winter, a window moving without complaint, felt like an oath the house had decided to keep. She noticed his phone calls thinning, fewer urgent footsteps after midnight, fewer cups left cold. Returning a book, she found a slim volume turned face down with a note tucked in the gutter. Rudenstein played for empty rooms during the war. Music made absence bearable until people returned. She wrote back on a scrap no larger than its courtesy. I do not play, yet I can listen for you. 3 minutes after the lamps come on, I will leave the door ajar. Have you ever noticed a small gesture changing a day, the way light shifts, and a room decides to be kind? Share the one that stayed with you, because the right kindness arrives like a key you carried without knowing until the lock turned. On the month's last Thursday, she set the smallest vase near the laptop stand in the study antechamber and tucked a card under its base. Garden north bed, before the first frost. Purple chrysanthemums might still agree to bloom. When she returned before closing, a folded sheet waited with 3 short lines, and a question shaped like a hand relearning how to ask. If I were to light a fire, how much wood would be wise? She wrote along the bottom edge. 3 logs, set with air between, 1 extra in reserve. The note vanished, and by night the chimney offered a thin, hopeful ribbon to the cold air. That night, Eviter arranged the study with the deliberation he reserved for acquisitions. The lamp cast a soft cone across leather shades hung half-drawn. A single window rested ajar, letting a cool autumn thread move across the room and turn the curtains into lungs. He left the safe cracked an inch, the platinum watch he wore to board votes, gleaming beside it. The leather folio lay open, contracts tabbed. A fountain pen bled a line into the blotter as if time had leaked. His phone sat face down within reach, and a bank envelope peeked from beneath the folio. He placed the desk chair at an angle, tilted his head, closed his eyes, and practiced stillness. He told himself it was not cruelty, only curiosity, and the ache of a night. He half remembered rain worrying the glass, a laptop casting a farewell, fingers finding his wrist, cool air from a window, a blanket and daisies with frank faces. Staff said nothing. The room woke tidy, his body alive, his shame intact. Small changes, softer bulbs, a flue that no longer sulked, rosemary in a hall, coaxed him toward daylight. If the hands that made those changes also pulled him back, he wanted to know. He set the stage and went still. Hinges confessed before the latch finished its swing. Amara's step was light but not apologetic. Citrus polish mingled with wool and cold air. She left the door almost shut, a seam of safety. Victor did not move. The breeze lifted a contract corner and tapped it against the blotter in a patient beat, like a metronome, measuring hesitations. He felt her sight take in the watch, the safe, the phone, the envelope. She moved first toward the window. 2 fingers steadied the sash. She eased it the smallest fraction and set the latch, so wood would not chatter and wake a sleeper. The air freshened without fanfare. She turned, folded her cloth into a square, and dusted in arcs that made plain what mattered to her. Care over curiosity. Papers stayed aligned, crumbs and shadows surrendered. The bleeding pen she righted, touching the nib with a blotter slip until it behaved. The glass went to a coaster. The phone she considered and left untouched, as if sight alone should satisfy any question. He had left the watch where a thief would call it providence. Her gaze found it and moved on. The safe mouth suggested darkness. She did not test it. Instead, she polished the brass keyhole until it returned a small coin of light and shifted her attention elsewhere. The folio's angle bothered her. She adjusted it, a finger's breadth, squared the stack, and set a paperweight to keep drafts honest. The envelope lounged in plain sight, her mouth pressed, a thinking. She slid it farther under the folio with the gentlest push, out of view, out of temptation's theater, and resumed. When the curtain ticked, she crossed the rug and tightened the tie back an inch so the fabric would not slap the sill. Then the blanket. She opened the cedar chest, drew wool, shook it once, and stood at his shoulder to map the rise and fall of breath. She settled warmth over him in one patient motion, the way a nurse grants dignity without asking permission. He forced his fingers not to curl into it. A single adjustment near the collar and she let the wool rest. The room took the cue and quieted. Only then did she add color. From the caddy she produced a small vase and a handful of daisies. Faces plain, stems freshly cut on the slant. Beads clung to the glass. She set them near the blotter, slid a square of card under the base to guard the leather, wrote a brief line and tucked the card beneath the vase, where closed eyes could not read it. Her handwriting, he had learned, favored tidy capitals when feeling threatened to overflow. He had set another trap. The phone screen brightened as a scheduled message flashed. Gate, in 10, delete the draft. He had typed it and marked it unsent, bait for curiosity. She watched the glow and did nothing more. A thumbprint lay a thought away. She left it alone and returned to the lamp base, where fingers always left moons rubbing the brass until it remembered a more generous light. Heat, unexpected and clean, crawled up his throat. Conscience cannot be audited. It reveals itself when no one is grading. Amara stood for a few seconds with palms on the chair back, thinking. He could hear the thought, the way wood hears winter. At last she whispered, "Sleep, sir," as if naming rest might persuade it to stay. She set 3 birch logs in the grate, with space between, nudged kindling into a small cabin, cracked the flue so smoke would not sulk in the chimney, checked the thermostat and nudged it up a degree. On the tray, she replaced the tumbler with a mug and left a teabag beside the kettle as a suggestion. She gathered the caddies, smoothed the rug with her shoe, and turned toward the door. The moment bent around her in a hush. He wanted to apologize, to admit the staged mess, to ask how she knew exactly where to place softness, to confess a fear that grief had made him a tyrant, even when he did nothing. The blanket warmed his ribs. The open window stopped scolding and became only air. He waited until her steps reached the door and paused again, a small linger assuring herself she had done no harm. He opened his eyes. Daisies faced him like honest witnesses. The envelope slept where she nudged it, beyond easy reach. The safe, untroubled, showed a seam thinner than a smile. He sat up, gathered the blanket, and read, "Leave the window as is until the room remembers how to breathe. Consider tea. Whiskey cannot light a fire." The line steadied him more than wool. He reached for the watch and felt unwilling to strap it on, as if time deserved slowness he had denied. He looked at the chair where she had stood, hands on wood, and at the square of clean leather her cloth had made. The urge to call her back rose, checked itself, and thinned into something quieter, a wish to deserve this gentleness without testing it first. He fed a match to kindling. Flame chased shavings, bit into birch, and leaned into itself. Heat reached his knuckles. The air smelled less of ink and fatigue and more of resin, wool, and combustion. He set the watch down and folded the blanket carefully, crease to crease, not as a man tidying an object, but as a student learning. At the threshold, he hesitated, looked back, and let the scene fix itself exactly. Flowers, air, wool, restraint. The test answered one question and asked a better one, whether he would meet integrity with his own. He let the fire speak a while. Its voice was enough. When has someone's kindness surprised you and altered the course of a difficult day? Tell us in the comments. The smallest mercy can be the hinge a heavy evening turns upon. Early winter edged the windows with a quiet frost that looked like breath held too long. Amara arrived before the timers lifted the lamps and moved through the corridor with a rhythm that made polish look like care rather than duty. Fireplaces were coaxed, not forced. She cleaned the grate, set 3 logs with air between, and waited for the match to teach the wood a warmer language. By the time the staff kettle began to murmur, a ribbon of smoke rose through the flue. The first note of the week lay beneath a slim vase on the antechamber table. "Thank you for winter jasmine. My wife loved wild corners where humble plants held the line when the season turned hard." She read the line twice, touched the edge with a fingertip, and filed it in memory instead of a pocket. Her reply went under the housekeeping log, proper and spare. "There is color near the north fence, stubborn and small. It prefers mornings. AH." Their messages multiplied without drama. Amara began sharing pieces of her mother that money could not purchase. A steady count during nebulizer nights. The trick of humming scales until fear's pulse slowed. Recipes that turned weakness into nourishment. Humor that refused surrender. Victor answered with winter portraits of his wife pruning rose canes in a borrowed flannel. Her cap dusted with frost, her voice explaining grafting as if kindness could be stitched into wood. Rooms learned to sound inhabited. Amara opened curtains to harvest pale light, replaced harsh bulbs with warmer ones from storage, and noted each swap with initials neat as stitches, tucked sprigs of rosemary along mantles as invitations to breathe. He noticed meal trays returned with evidence of appetite, cups half empty rather than untouched, a chair pulled closer to the hearth, a book left open beside kindling. One afternoon, a card was left by the piano. Rubinstein played for empty rooms during the war. Music made absence bearable until people returned. "Vi," she answered in small script on the back of a maintenance slip. "I cannot play, but I can leave the lid open and listen from the hall at dusk." That evening, after lamps bloomed, a scale wandered into the corridor like a shy animal, stopped and tried again. Frost spidered across the lanterns along the drive, and car tires whispered away into the dark. Inside, late calls thin. He began to leave the study door open between conversations as if air itself had become less dangerous. A note folded like a small tent appeared by the tea caddy. "My son kept a jar for found buttons. He loved the feel of color sorted back into chaos. Once we rescued a sparrow that had stunned itself against this window. He named it Captain and insisted we salute when it flew." Amara wiped the window with a cloth that squeaked only once and set seat on the sill outside. A tiny table for visiting birds. Her reply waited beside the kettle. "Thank you for the captain and the button jar. My mother says mercy is the only thing that grows in every climate when watered. Tea is ready when you are. AH." The kettle began to serve tea more often than whiskey, and the study gained a softness. He wrote about the first winter after the accident when he set the thermostat low as penance, refused flowers because color felt like treason, and measured nights by sirens that never came inside. She wrote about bus rides with familiar faces at the pharmacy, December sidewalks glittering with sand, soups gentle enough for tired lungs, and chairs pulled close so laughter did not need to cross a room alone. He told a story of his wife teaching their son to smell soil for help. She told one about street vendors who knew her mother's order and tucked extra bread into the bag without comment. The house began to echo kindly. The break room bulletin board collected fewer complaints and more practical corrections written in tidy capital. The gardener left a paper bag of pine cones by the service door. Amara arranged them in brass near the hearth, with a note, "For the crackle when you want it." The bowl emptied by morning and a card replaced it. "I wanted it," Vidler named it. Neither rushed. A week later, a slim envelope hid in the log. Inside lay a photograph. A woman leaning into winter roses, eyes laughing, cheeks bright from cold, mouth about to teach. In the margin, Victor had written, "She loved flowers for how they refused despair. I hid this for a year as if grief were shame. Today the house feels strong enough to hold it." Vaishya Amara placed the photo in the library behind glass, where firelight would kindle without erasing her face, then left a card under the frame. "Welcome home. A.H." He opened further with a letter that required a whole sheet. "I woke from the same morning again and searched for proof that time had moved. While I could not, your vases, the open curtains, the easier window, the rosemary that lingers on the stair rail, the piano waiting, these have become proofs. My boy would have turned 6 in January." He lined toy cars by color and believed the slowest one was thoughtful, not broken. "My wife drove too carefully for gossip and sang along to songs she disliked, because I loved them. I am afraid of joy, and yet these small things invite it without negotiation." Amara sat with the letter until the room steadied. Then she chose cardstock that would not buckle and wrote without crossing out a single word. "I am sorry for the morning that will not relent. Thank you for trusting me with Captain, the cars, and a driver who rewrote caution as love. Memory and joy are not rivals. They are siblings who argue and share bread. My mother says breath returns to rooms that have witnessed gentleness. If you ever want company that says nothing, I can still be nearby. A.H." The study door stayed open that evening. Firelight wrote slow water on the ceiling. Victor stood at the window and watched frost begin its lace, not with dread but with the odd relief of noticing that beauty refuses to bargain and appears anyway. He folded her card and placed it alongside the photograph, then sharpened a pencil and listed proofs that ask for no argument. Steam, wool, pine, rosemary, bird song, scales, buttons, seed holes, pencil shavings, the weight of a child's blanket, the quiet that follows real laughter. What small act helped you heal when language failed? A cup set down within reach, a window eased open, a note that told you the day could still be kind. Share your story. Someone nearby may need your map tonight. Your voice might steady someone tonight. Be generous, please. When she left by the service door, Amara paused in the sting of cold and let it wake her fully. Above the hedges, a single star threaded a patient path through haze. She pictured her mother asleep with a book tented on her chest, tea cooling within reach, the concentrator humming like an old friend. Behind her, the house held a soft fire. Leaving did not feel like severing anything fragile. It felt like extending a line from one home to another and promising, without ceremony, to return with more light tomorrow. Grace Turner arrived before noon without an invitation, heels ticking across marble. A reporter and a photographer followed close behind. Winter pressed a dull sky to the windows. Frost filmed the lantern glass. Mrs. Carver met them at the threshold. "Miss Turner, Mr. Langley is unavailable. Please schedule through his office." Grace smiled through the refusal and stepped into the grand hallway. "We brought congratulations," she said. "A feature on recovery, tragedy endured, home renewed, leadership with a heart." The photographer raised the lens and collected the chandelier and the stairs in quick, silent bites. Victor left the study. He looked composed. "You were warned after your last trespass," he said. "Leave." Grace fanned the reporter's blank pages. "Or talk about the story already forming. A guarded executive whose heart reopens because a young maid brings flowers, notes, and warmth. We don't judge. We observe what you've made visible." Amara polishing the banisters still. She stepped into the column's shadow, ready to become part of the building until the weather passed. Grace's gaze found her with delight. "There," she said. The author of Tenderness, Mrs. Carver shifted to block the camera. No photographs of staff, Grace didn't cede ground. She drifted to the entry console and slid a slender card from beneath a vase. The neat handwriting read, "For weary shoulders on cold nights." She held it toward the reporter. Initials. Human. Suggestive without being coarse. Victor extended his hand. "Return that." Grace slipped the card into the folder and sauntered toward the library. She paused under the photograph Amara had framed. His wife bending over winter roses and exhaled a sigh. Polished for microphones. "How moving," she said. A widower guided through darkness by quiet devotion from someone far beneath his station. Investors adore redemption. Heat climbed under Amara's coat. Those objects were not props. They were proofs that a house had learned to breathe again. The photographer crouched, placing daisies between leather and light to capture contrast. Marble, petals, money, initials. "Don't," Victor said. A single warning with edges. Grace only smiled. The reporter slid telephotos across his palm. A blanket folded on a chair. A jar of graphite near a window. Amara's reflection, ghosted in a frame as she dusted. Domestic intimacy, Grace murmured. Not scandal, strictly. Merely a question for curiosity. Can a billionaire be helped by a maid without it becoming power dressed as kindness? Mrs. Carver stepped closer until her shoulder almost touched Amara's. "You will not harass staff," she said. "You will not imply impropriety inside a home that invited you to do neither." Grace draped her voice in sugar and turned it toward Amara. "We're celebrating you," she said. "A girl from nowhere, lifting a dynasty with daisies and notes. You must feel very seen." The lens lifted for a close shot of a face that did not conceal. Amara moved sideways, not running, choosing air that did not smell like bait. She slipped through the side door into the garden, where beds had been pared to bone and breath lingered white. Rosemary kept a stubborn green near the north fence. She set both hands on a bench to stop the tremor moving through her. Voices inside. A door thudded. Gravel registered impatient feet. The photographer rounded the hedge. "Just one picture," he said. "Public interest." "Public harm," she replied, stepping behind a trellis that broke his view. "Please don't." He tried for a sliver. The lens clicked and stuttered. Back in the hallway, Grace's patience thinned. "Look at her flee," she said. "Innocent people stand their ground." "She declined to feed your trap," Victor answered. "Print a lie and discovery will bankrupt your enthusiasm." Grace's smile sharpened. "Consider the optics. Wealth insulated by lawsuits. A working woman dragged into secrecy by the employer who claims to value her. The narrative writes itself. Lonely magnate, impressionable employee, soft evidence scattered through a sterile palace." Victor counted losses already paid. A son who would never turn 6. A laugh sealed in glass. Nights measured by sirens that didn't stop. Mornings steadied by small proofs left by hands that asked nothing. He saw Rosemary, soft and light, the piano waiting, the photograph that no longer needed hiding. He looked at Mrs. Carver, guardian of standards and decency, and at the door where cold air had followed Amara. Then he decided. "Out," he said. "Now," he signaled escort them to the gate. "If they resist, call the police. Mrs. Carver, document everything for counsel. I will contact the owners." Grace lifted one shoulder as though accepting applause. "We have enough," she said. "Readers adore a chasm bridged by charity." She paused on the threshold. "When you tire of fragile help, Victor, call me. Power requires discipline." She stepped onto the porch with her entourage. Boots grinding froth. He followed the step and watched the car swing away. Tires spitting stones. Exhaust writing brief ghosts across the drive. When the gate slid shut, he walked toward the garden. Amara stood by the rosemary bed, eyes on the green that refused to surrender. He stopped at a respectful distance. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have anticipated her." She turned kindness into ammunition. Amara answered, voice level, though her hands were cold. "My mother's friends read everything. The church office reads everything. I don't want your name dragged because I placed a flower." He rested a gloved hand on the bench, leaving the plank between them, as a boundary rather than a bridge. "My name can take weather," he said, quietly. "Yours shouldn't be a shield for mine. I won't allow her to harm you." She nodded once. "I can resign," she said, offering the only protection she owned. "If distance saves you." "No," he said. "Resignation rewards her scheme. You have done nothing wrong." He raised his voice toward the hedge where the photographer had hovered. "Grace Turner will not define this house." Victor reached into his coat and produced the card Grace had stolen. now recovered. He set it on the bench, not handing it directly to her. She took this, he said. It's yours. Amara slid it into her pocket, without reading. Thank you, she said. He looked toward the windows, where frost had sketched nerves, that a pale sun might soften. Council will contact the paper today, he said. Our investigators will identify whoever leaked schedules and slip. Photographs taken here without consent will be contested. If they print, we answer with truth under oath. If you're willing, we continue as we were. Flowers when they help, notes when words are useful, silence when quiet heals. Amara drew a steady breath. Respect is enough, she said. I won't hide. I'll keep working. If questions meet me by the gate, I'll say I tidy rooms and boil tea. Good, he said. Then we'll go back inside. The wind shifted. Rosemary released a clean scent. In the windows beyond the hedges, firelight moved. They returned together, not touching, steps aligned, each carrying winter and something warmer, that refused the names. Rumor wanted to give it. The hallway accepted them, with its usual hush, and somehow with loyalty too. Outside, gray clouds held, promising a longer winter still. Cold rain needled the gutters before dawn, washing frost from the eaves and turning the hedges to ink. At 5:12 a.m., the alarm panel hiccuped, blinked, and stilled. In the staff corridor, fluorescent tubes glowed above two gray ranks of lockers. Amara hung her coat, slid her canvas bag onto the shelf, checked the clasp and closed the locker, breathing lemon oil and wool. Mrs. Carver paced with a clipboard. Weather metals with circuits, she murmured. We'll ring maintenance if the logs look strange. Amara tied her apron and began towels, stair rails, lamps. Rain pressed a dull sky to the windows. Then the side bell rang, and it did not sound like delivery. 2 officers entered, coats dripping. A plainclothes investigator followed. Counting cameras. Burglary report, the taller one said. Anonymous tip about jewelry belonging to Mr. Langley's late wife. Silence tightened. This way, Mrs. Carver said. We'll check the safe and manifests. Victor was downtown chairing a fund meeting he could not shift. In the study, appraisal numbers matched until one did not. A sapphire and diamond pendant in a velvet case. Where does staff keep personal effects? The investigator asked. Through here, Mrs. Carver said. They filed into the corridor. We'll search lockers with consent, the officer said. Keys turned. Doors yawned. At Amara's, the latch lifted too easily. As if coaxed in the night, beneath her folded sweater, velvet, the investigator opened the case. Blue fire leapt. The number matched. A camera rode a shoulder and recorded her stillness, as if stillness confessed. That isn't mine, Amara said, keeping her voice level. Mrs. Carver's composure cracked. She would not, she said. Hands where we can see them, the officer answered. Miranda rights followed. Do you wish to speak? The detective asked. Only to say I am being framed, she said. Please call Mr. Langley. Phones began to move. Victor's assistant relayed what she knew and watched the color drain from his face. He excused himself and went for the elevator. By then the cruiser had carried Amara into the city, past a church sign insisting hope is a verb. At the station, she sat on a metal chair opposite a desk, where an officer typed without looking up. Do you have a key to the safe? No. Who knew your locker number? Anyone who read the roster. Do you know who would hurt you? Someone is trying to hurt him. Victor arrived with rain slicking his hair. Where is she? Processing. The sergeant said. You can't see her until the arraignment. She has counsel. Then counsel can see her. Put on the record my statement, that this is a fabrication engineered by Grace Turner, or someone on her payroll. Victor said. She trespassed last week with a photographer. She knew the object and the cord. We follow evidence, the sergeant replied. The pendant was found in her locker. It is a frame, Victor said. News sprinted faster than due process. A gossip account posted the portico under a pewter sky. Another pushed a collage from long lenses. A pundit chewed the word imbalance, until it sounded like principle. The headline never used her name, but it carved letters into her life anyway. Comment anchors adopted a knowing tone, and floated an old, mean phrase. Gold dig. They paired it with soft music and blurred photos, suggesting concern while feeding appetite. Her initials became a cipher for scandal. Friends texted her with question marks, and please tell me this isn't true, as if denial could outshout a banner that crawled all afternoon across the screens everywhere. Back at the mansion, Mrs. Carver scrolled through alarm log. At 5:12 the panel hiccuped. At 5:13, a staff door registered open for 9 seconds, then shut. She printed everything and called Victor. "We have a blip and a door," she said. The gardener remembered a car idling before dawn. The valet remembered a van that came without a parcel and left when he stepped outside. Amara gave fingerprints, sat for photographs, and waited in a holding room where the clock ticked like criticism. She thought of her mother's pills rationed into days marked with pen, of the rosemary sprig on the mantel, of the photograph by the piano. She kept breathing because breath was the one currency malice could not confiscate. The attorney met her in a narrow room. "Bail is feasible." She gave him Grace's name. "We'll file preservation notices today," he said. "No one erases anything." Bail was set. Victor paid without looking at the number. "Conditions," the clerk said. "Do you understand them?" "She will comply," he answered. When Amara stepped into the fluorescent lobby, he rose, then halted, palms open. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have anticipated the next move. No one expects thieves to use kindness as a crowbar." She replied, "She did, and she will again." "They will not keep us apart much longer," he said. "Counsel will handle contact rules by tomorrow. I will clear your name." She shook her head. "You can clear my name. Your boardroom will still carry gossip like static. Every gesture will be reread as leverage. Every flower will be evidence in a story that has already chosen its ending." She took an envelope from her bag, sealed with a careful line of glue. "This is my resignation." He did not take it. "I refuse," he said. "Resignation rewards the architect. Please, let me step aside until you are safe. I cannot stand between you and the work that feeds 100 paychecks. Protecting you is not surrender. It is a strategy learned from weather." He looked at the paper, at the wet street beyond the glass, at the camera waiting across the curb, then at her face, and accepted the envelope as if it were fragile and powerful at once. They waited under the awning for a car. Rain stitched the city into one sheet. Miss Garver called again. Security footage showed a shadow near the staff door minutes before the glitch. Hooded, face turned from the lens. "We'll pull the gate camera next," she said. "We'll canvass the blocks." "Good," Victor said. He raised an umbrella above Amara when the rideshare stopped. "I'll post a guard on your building tonight." "Please don't," she said. "Let the street look ordinary. Then I will wait nearby," he answered. She placed a palm over the envelope in his hand. "Keep the photograph by the piano," she said. "It helps me remember that a room can survive a lie and still belong to truth." She slid into the car and faced forward as if she had chosen a road no gossip could match. Victor watched the taillights smear red on wet asphalt, then called his investigator. "Begin," he said. "Start with Grace. Track key copies, code changes and contractor visits. Pull cell pings and traffic cams. I want the 9 seconds at 5:13 explained down to the breath. No theory, evidence." He ended the call and stood in the rain until the cold reached his bones. He felt rage and behind it something more demanding. Resolve. He would not let malice decide the story. He would not let Amara carry the weight alone. Snow began before dawn. A quiet sift that softened rooftops and erased curb grit. Victor stood at his study window with the phone to his ear while flakes braided the air. "We pulled traffic cameras," he said. "Grace Turner's sedan passed your gate at 5:07 a.m. She looped the block, idled near the alley, and left at 5:19. "Key access?" Victor asked. "A subcontractor from a locksmith service performed maintenance 3 weeks ago," the man replied. "Payments hit his account from a shell owned by Turner Capital the day before. He handed a copied master to a handyman who temped here last summer. Cell pings place both men near your staff door before sunrise. File preservation notices," Victor said. "Subpoena the financials. Seize the locksmith's logs and request a warrant on the shell. Follow the money." By noon the constellation was clear. The locksmith admitted to copying a key and logging it as a test. The handyman, cornered by pings and deposits, confessed to placing the velvet case in a locker chosen because it belonged to the girl. Always there, the one who wrote tidy cards. Signed with initials. The shell's ledger read like a trail of crumbs no winter could hide. Grace had not touched the necklace. She had financed the path that carried it. Counsel met Victor and the assistant district attorney in a glass room that smelled faintly of toner. Exhibits crossed the table. The prosecutor checked the times, tapped the folder, and nodded once. "We will move for a warrant," she said. "Do you intend to comment?" "I intend to testify," Victor answered, "and to apologize to the person whose life you are helping me restore." Papers moved quickly. Outside, snow thickened. Elevators opened and closed like measured breaths. Police arrested Grace Turner in a lobby of mirrors where winter light drew hard geometry. She did not feign confusion. A rumor is cheaper than a takeover, she told the detective. You cannot acquire a company run on grief without loosening its bolts. I paid for competence, the rest was garnish. In the interview room, she folded her coat with surgical care, then admitted the scheme. Pay the locksmith, hire the handyman, plant the pendant, call an anonymous tip, direct a photographer, let bias finish the job. A stenographer recorded each sentence. The confession traveled to the courthouse before dusk. The news broke at 6. Amara had just warmed soup and folded laundry when the banner scrolled across the screen. Turner Capital CEO arrested, staff member exonerated and frayed. Her mother's breath hitched, then steady. I told you truth keeps walking, she murmured, pressing a tissue into Amara's hand as if handing over a passport. Vindication did not lift the whole weight. It simply allowed lungs to work again. Phones began ringing with softer questions. Mrs. Carver left a message in her measured cadence. You were always trustworthy. We are grateful. The gardener texted a photograph of the rosemary bed, wearing a hat of snow, captioned, still green. Victor wrote, I am coming by if you allow it. Amara replied, yes. 3rd floor, end of the hall. Her mother smoothed the quilt and pretended to search for a book, giving them privacy without ceremony. Amara opened the door before he knocked. He set the bag on the table. Tea and bread, he said. It felt correct to arrive with warmth instead of flour. You did not owe me an apology, she said. You owed her reckoning, and you brought it. I tested your kindness, he said quietly. That made you visible to a predator who hunts decency. I am sorry. You did not make me visible, Amara answered. Kindness is visible. She would have aimed at any light, but you stood your ground when it mattered. He explained what the investigators had found. Pings at the gate, the copied key, payments through a shell, and a confession that treated malice as a strategy. Amara listened with her hands around a mug. They chose my locker because I looked guilty, she said, not quite smiling. They misread reserve as weakness. That misread is everywhere. He set his cup down and met her eyes. You kept going. You breathed through humiliation, fed your mother, and still left notes that made rooms gentler. I fell in love with that. The words landed without flourish. Amara blinked, then nodded as if a truth she had carried finally spoke its own name. I loved you when you slid the window, true, she said, and when you wrote that your son called the slowest car thoughtful instead of broken. I loved you when you refused to let Grace define the house. She glanced toward the bedroom where her mother rested. I resigned to protect you. The resignation felt like abandoning a patient in recovery. He reached for her hand and paused until she bridged the space. The touch was steady, chosen by people who had learned restraint. Come back, he said, not to invisibility, not to duties you no longer want, but to a life we can build with honesty. Come back to the garden, the piano, the study where winter learned a different air. Come back to me. I will, she said. Tomorrow we will help my mother rest. The day after, we stand beside the fireplace and let the room relearn our names. Outside, a plow sighed along the street, leaving a dark seam in the drift. At the mansion later, Victor lit the study fire and placed the photograph of his wife and son where flame warmed their faces, without erasing detail. He did not hide the frame. He did not beg it to bless his future. He simply let memory share the room with hope. The piano lid remained open. On the sill, a shallow tray held seed for sparrows that might wake hungry. Staff moved with quieter shoulders. No one spoke the word scandal. No one needed to. Amara returned the next evening with her mother's blessing and a scarf her neighbors had knitted by consensus. Snow thinned into glitter, then ceased. She stepped into the hall where their first notes had traveled. The air smelled of cedar and tea. A vase held rosemary. Another held daisies. She set her hand on the banister and felt the grain's patient memory. Victor waited in the doorway, not at the desk. He had learned to stand where welcome lives. Have you ever fought for someone you love with stubborn truth and steady work until a story bent toward justice? Victor asked the room, as if the walls deserved the answer. Share your experience. Amara added, your map might guide a stranger out of winter. They sat by the fire. He told her about court dates and restitution. She told him about a church friend who had left groceries at their door all week without a note. They did not rehearse pain. They accounted for it. They did not promise never to falter. They promised to keep the window unlatched when breath needed help, and to pick up every fallen daisy stem and try again. When Victor left her building that night, bread still warm in his coat. A new appointment lived in his chest. Morning at the gate, noon in the rosemary corner, evening by the desk where humility had bloomed. Behind him, in the small kitchen, Amara wrapped soup for her mother and watched the city glow with temporary purity. Footprints would disturb the sheet by morning. Buses would grind the drifts to slate. She chose anyway to call the night beautiful. Snow wrote its patient script across the rooftops, promising that someone would read it kindly. April returned with softened light and patient rain. Months after Grace's confession, hearings ended, apologies settled, and breath felt ordinary again. On a quiet Saturday, Victor brought lemon tea, warm bread, and a folded sketch to Amara's apartment. Her mother smiled a blessing and gave them privacy. The sketch mapped the backyard, roses along the fence, herbs by the steps, stepping stones curving to a bench beneath rosemary, a tiny vase penciled at the end. "If you approve, I'll hire the neighborhood crew and pay union wages," he said. Amara traced the path, and he took her hands. "I kept a photograph beside firelight and feared looking forward would betray what I loved. You showed me that memory can stand with tomorrow. Marry me." Her yes arrived like sunlight lifting damp from brick. Her mother laughed through tears. The ring held a modest sapphire, reclaiming a stone once used against them as a promise of truth. He slid the band onto her finger. Worry unclenched and joy entered. Neighbors slipped notes. The choir texted harmonies. Mrs. Carver sent a card offering help. Victor hired the crew, paid well, and worked beside them with careful hands. By May, the little garden breathed. Rosemary hummed with bees. Sweet peas climbed twine, and the second-hand bench wore paint the color of morning. Victor placed flowers from the mansion's north beds into the tiny vase marked on the sketch, and they drank tea while evening stitched the street into gentleness. No one said fate. They said work, patience, gratitude, and help. They chose a Saturday in June. The ceremony would live beneath the oldest elm in the mansion's garden, a place once haunted by hush and now taught to welcome laughter. Invitations were mixed, including executives, neighbors, choir members, staff, and friends from the clinic and church. Miss Carver scheduled everything with grace. The valet mapped arrivals, the cook recruited aunties to supervise pies, and the gardener promised rosemary at every table. The morning broke clear after the night's rain. Windows stood open, music drifted through the hall, and fresh loaves cooled in rows. Under the elm, an arch wrapped in ivy framed the aisle. Daisies faced forward like honest witnesses. Rosemary perfumed the air. Birds visited the seed tray and lingered as if they had RSVP'd. The piano waited with its lid lifted, a gentle invitation requiring no word. Staff moved like an ensemble, respectful, proud, and slightly astonished by how home had crowded out grandeur without dimming beauty. Amara stepped from the sunroom wearing a dress sewn by 3 neighbors and pressed at dawn by her mother's careful hand. Light caught the hem and scattered small sparks across the tile. Victor stood near the arch in a suit that fit like a glove. He turned, saw her, and forgot caution. They met beneath ivy as friends and strangers settled into one breathing body. The officiant began with a brief story about windows learning to open after winter. Vows followed, plain and particular, rooted in tasks they already practiced. They promised to keep the window unlatched when breath needed help, to leave seed when weather emptied the tray, to write notes for difficult days, to set 3 logs with space between, to lift photographs without begging ghosts for permission, to honor labor, to invite neighbors, and to celebrate ordinary triumphs. No one reached for grand rhetoric. Their language held steady like a hand beneath a cup. Victor spoke first. "I promise to meet kindness with action and to respect your work, dignity, and time. I will protect the truth when rumor prowls. I will share my home with friends, strangers, and family, until safety feels normal for every person who crosses our threshold. I will listen without fixing when silence heals better than solutions, and I will heat the kettle when days turn thin." The garden exhaled as though an old wall had learned to become a gate. Amara answered, luminous and sure, "I promise to trust tenderness when fear suggests retreat. I will tell the truth, practice patience, honor memory while reaching for tomorrow, and lean on you without apology when strength runs out. I will keep faith with your son's story, hold your late wife's kindness beside our hope, and see you as a man, not a myth, every ordinary afternoon. I will be brave with you and gentle toward the world we build." Her mother carried the rings on an open book that had held prayers through sickness and recovery, dabbed her eyes, and placed rosemary in their hands. The choir sang a hymn that sounded like morning torn open by light. When the kiss arrived, it felt less like a climax, and more like a door swinging on hinges. finally oiled. Guests stood. Applause rose and laughter crossed rows without tripping over differences. After photographs by the piano and toasts on the steps, long tables filled the lawn. Linen met weathered wood, small jars held wildflowers, and pies competed to disappear first. Children chased bubbles into hedges while executives learned how to compliment quilts. A woman from the clinic told Amara that watching a maid marry beneath chandeliers had mended something private in her heart. The gardener pretended not to cry, and Mrs. Carver declared that dignity had never looked more like joy. Victor carried plates to elderly guests and refilled pitchers while Amara's mother presided over a table that treated strangers as cousins. The afternoon lengthened without hurry. Conversation folded into contentment. Twilight settled, and lights strung through branches woke one by one. Victor lifted a glass. "Thank you for carrying us through winter," he said. "Thank you for refusing spectacle and choosing steadfast truth. This home belongs to anyone who needs a place to breathe." He turned toward Amara, lowered his voice, and added, "You transformed rooms without moving walls. You taught me that small acts draw maps." Music rose. They danced while murmurs softened around them. Over near the rosemary bed, sparrows hopped along the stones, as if inspecting the program. The moon lifted beyond the hedges and laid a pale ribbon across the grass. Later they sat on the bench they had imagined months earlier, and listened to the slow rhythm that had replaced panic. In the windows, candles flickered with the quiet confidence of a house that understood its purpose. Victor kissed her forehead and thanked every hour that had delivered them here, from the first note to the last petition, from evidence to acquittal, from suspicion to trust. Amara rested her head against his shoulder and thought about work done well, neighbors who showed up, and kindness that refused to be embarrassed by its power. They did not declare victory over every sorrow. They promised to keep the window unlatched and the kettle ready. At the edge of the lawn, Amara turned to the camera, and the invisible circle gathered beyond the screen. "If today reminds you that tenderness still wins, stay with us," she said. "We will keep telling stories where decency triumphs over noise, where work steadies grief, and where love refuses surrender." Victor slipped an arm around her waist, and together they offered the invitation that belongs on every timeline hungry for love. Stay, share, and help kindness travel even farther. Subscribe for more stories of love conquering all. Did Amara's kindness inspire you? Comment below and share this tale of hope.